Hello, I'm Fran Foster, past master of Setauket Lodge in East Bridgewater. Welcome to our 28th program in a continuing series of what it means to be a Mason. I have the pleasure today to have with me Most Worshipful Fred K. Bauer, Grand Master of Masons in Massachusetts. Welcome to our program.
Good afternoon, Fran.
You came from Missouri, I believe. I read in your history somewhere.
That's right. I was born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri, went to school, college out in St. Louis, got married, and had our daughters, two of our three, from the St. Louis area.
Mm-hmm. Then you moved to Massachusetts?
Moved with Massachusetts with one of the companies I had been with in actually 1965, with becoming a Mason in 1968.
Excellent. So you became a Mason in Massachusetts. You weren't a Mason in Missouri?
No, I wasn't. I was a DeMolay in Missouri.
DeMolay, all right.
Had been all the officers and continued to be with DeMolay for many years in St. Louis.
Oh, good, good. Now you've been a master of a lodge, obviously.
I have. North Reading Lodge in North Reading.
North Reading.
In 1974, 75.
And you were a past district deputy?
I sure was. Served under Arthur Melanson in 79 and Phil Berquist in 1980. Enjoyed both of those years. Malden, 7th Masonic District.
Okay. And from my reading of the history, you're also a Shriner?
I am. Shriner. Joined Aleppo Temple in 1980 and shortly thereafter became, in one of their units, the Clown Unit, known as Kirby the Clown.
Kirby the Clown, yes. I had heard that somewhere. Can you tell us some of the history of Masonry? I know Masonry started in Massachusetts in 1733, but it was around a lot longer than before that, and nobody seems to have any permanent records of what happened and when it happened.
Oh, it goes way back. There were Masons in the building of King Solomon's Temple. King Solomon was one of our past Grand Masters. The guilds were formed, and there were building of the temples and then on to the cathedrals and the Colosseums and through Europe. It moved through history. And finally then they were known as speculative and operative, but there were not anyone that had not been actually used their hands in masonry. Mm-hmm. So then an organization became, and still part of the Masons, but started to use the various symbols that were used by the actual operative Masons. And they, in the turn around in England, they became known and formed a Grand Lodge. And therefore we always look to our mother Grand Lodge as that coming from England. Then it moved across into Ireland, and there were number 2. And then, as you mentioned, in 1733, Henry Price was commissioned to come to America, and he formed what was then known as the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts in 1733. There had been lodges meeting in America. They had come over for quite a long time, but there had not been a formed Grand Lodge prior to 1733. Mm-hmm. But Masons used to meet in taverns and out in the hills and the vales. We didn't have all the beautiful temples that we have today, but they met for social, as many of our lodges do. They met for a good time. They met for trying to better themselves and their families and to take care of each other. We have had such a rich history in Massachusetts. My goodness, going back, we've had past Grand Masters. Paul Revere was a Grand Master of Massachusetts. Joseph Warren was a past Grand Master of Massachusetts. Joseph Warren actually was the Grand Master at the time when he fell in the Revolution.
At Bunker Hill?
Reed's Hill.
Reed's Hill, okay.
We now respectfully know it as Bunker Hill. That's where the monument is. And we're quite proud of that whole episode. The National Park Society has just asked the Masons, they are going to, with federal money that's being renovated, and the movie that many people have watched and seen, The Whites of Their Eyes, they've asked, they want to update it, they want to bring it up to modern state of the art, and they've asked the Masons, and we are going to sponsor the new movie that will be shown at the new museum at the Bunker Hill Monument. The U.S. Constitution was designed and built by many Masons at the time. The first Secretary of United States, Major General Knox, he was a Mason. And of course, several of the captains aboard the ship, including John Paul Jones, he was a famous Mason. We have a lot of their relics in our Grand Lodge building down at Boston. We have a beautiful museum open to the public, libraries open to the public. You might be interested to know we have a lot of students from all over the world that come and study American Revolution history as well as much of the other history. Students from MIT, Harvard are constantly coming down to our library, and Masons certainly can use that library for their own enjoyment as well as research. Cynthia Alcorn, our librarian, is actually known throughout the world as one of the most noted authors of Masonic literature, and we're very fortunate to have her on our staff.
I had her and Michael Comeback on one of my shows.
Oh, did you?
Yes,
Wonderful.
Yes, they did a good show. Now, I've been doing some reading lately, and it was Masonic reading, of course, and I find that a lot of the forming of our Constitution in our country is based on Masonic principles, like the separation of religion and state, for one. And there are many other Masonic teachings that are kind of embedded in our laws and rules as they went along.
Well, that's not strange when you really stop to think that so many of the founding fathers were all Masons. They believed in principles of freedom. They believed in a country. America, I mean, we would now say they believed in America, but America was just being formed. They had come from a lot of tyranny, from not just England, but I mean from other parts of the world. Religion was very important to them, but not a religion. They received that in their Masonic teachings, because as you know, I mean, many people confuse the Masonic fraternity, and they'll even accuse us of being a religion. We're anything but a religion. But a man must believe in a supreme being. Many people are interested to know that on our Bible, on our altars, there is an altar and there is a Holy Bible. It could be the King James Version, but it could be the Torah. It could be the Gita. It could be the Hindu, the Quran. It could be any of Buddhist work, as long as you believe in a supreme being.
Many of the readings will say VSL, Volume of Sacred Law. The volume of sacred law to that person, whatever it may be.
Well, we believe in that, and it's a prerequisite of becoming a Mason, because we feel that to be a good man and true, you must have something that you believe in, something greater than yourself, a supreme being. Mm-hmm. Some of the churches have problems with that. They will, they want us to particularly be a one doctrine or one faith. We tolerate all faiths. And at times, the Masonry, the fraternity has gone under attack by different churches for that very reason. Different religions or different people will say, well, you only believe one way. Not so. We don't try to teach any man a belief. He must do that on his own.
Or politics.
Or politics. Oh, well, that's a good one. I love to use that because we actually, in our regulations, say there will be no discussion of politics.
Or religion.
Within the lodge.
Within the lodge, right.
But only because we don't want to cite the mirth. We don't want, say, that Democrats, Republicans to be arguing with each other or promoting a particular candidate. But can you imagine Paul Revere and John Warren and, say, John Hancock and Benjamin not talking politics?
Right.
Of course they did. And so do Masons today.
But they talk as individuals.
They talk as individuals. We have selectmen, we have mayors, we have senators, we have governors. Very strong. In fact, one of the basic parts of Masonry, there can be no even thought or hint of trying to overthrow the government. Work within our government. Treason is very big, not just in America, but if you were a Mason in Europe, in France, and throughout Asia, in Africa, all of our Grand Lodges, murder and treason are two crimes we cannot tolerate. All the rest, we will certainly look and act upon.
Back in the revolutionary times, I've been reading lately that there is much speculation that the Indians of the Boston Tea Party were not Indians.
Well, history has recorded that several times, but let me tell you that the night of that occurrence, the Lodge of St. Andrew is known to have met, and they went from labor to recess. And some of them may have put on some costumes and may have gone and drifted down and perhaps got a little ambitious with the tea. It is recorded again in our library. When they returned, a good time was had by all and the lodge was closed.
Yeah, Freemasonry is replete with history going way, way, way back. And it is a beautiful organization of symbols that teaches friendship, morality, and brotherly love. And it's all over the world.
Sure is. I have just recently, my wife and I returned from our lodges in Panama. And it was so wonderful we also visited with the Grand Lodge of Panama and the Grand Master, and there was such a warmth. And we had the Grand Lodge of Scotland represented, we had the Grand Lodge of England, had a lodge in Panama, and our three lodges. And when I was attending the Grand Lodge of Panama, it was all in Spanish. And I had an interpreter, and he had an interpreter. And my whole message was, isn't this wonderful, the universality of Masonry, where we can come together, we have differences, we speak a different language, we have a different face at the time, but we're Masons. We're meeting together. We had a wonderful time having at the meeting, and then our wives and such were socializing, and we went out for dinner together. This is what Masonry is all about.
You can go anywhere in the world and find this friendship.
Yes, you can. We have been with the Grand Masters Conference. We just recently returned from Savannah, Georgia. The North American Conference represents 64 different jurisdictions. That gets a little confusing, but there's Canada, and there's Mexico, and all the Grand Masters of each different province, as well as all the ones from the United States. And we meet we have several programs. We have the George Washington Monument, and just recently that has had the beautiful square and compass symbol, which you can see every time you fly out of any of the Washington airports now, and that monument was dedicated to George Washington, a beloved father and president of the United States, I understand. But he was also a past master of Alexander Lodge in Virginia. He served there. He was a Mason and a master while he served as president of the United States. Some interesting notes, he used to come to Boston quite often. He and his lovely bride, Martha, they enjoyed and were coming to visit because of many of his generals and many of his soldiers, but they would have he would attend Masonic meetings. It is recorded. And he was so loved in Boston area that even when he passed away, Martha brought herself to Boston and came and appeared before the Grand Lodge and presented a lock of hair of her husband in memory of the wonderful friendship between George Washington and several of the officers at the time in our Grand Lodge. To this day, when we install the new Grand Master, the Deputy Grand Master carries a very beautiful urn of gold wrought by Paul Revere. He did more than just silver. Mm-hmm. And inside is a lock of hair of Brother George Washington. And it's a very, very priceless relic that we have, and we have several like that. And I remember our Sovereign Grand Commander, Paul Ralston, just recently had the Grand Commanders from all over Europe come to, and they were hosted here in Boston. And I invited them to come through our museum and library and